Welcome to the My Personal Football Coach Youth Soccer Player Development Podcast, episode 35 with Tom Hounsell.
Welcome to MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's Soccer Player Development Podcast. Discover all the secrets, hints and tips about soccer player development and soccer coaching from some of the leading figures in world soccer. Here's your host, Saul Isaacson-Hurst.
Hi guys, welcome back to another show. This show's coming live from Thailand, on location here, out here for a month working with some clubs and some players. Been fantastic, but fortunately enough managed to get some time to get some interviews in as well. So really looking forward to this one. This one's really good. Before we get into it though, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's out in Chicago at the United Soccer Coaches Convention. Really great to meet so many people out there. Great to get lots of more clubs on board. Pleased to announce as well getting LA Galaxy Orange County on board as a partner club. LA Galaxy Orange County are taking advantage of our Pro Club package. So not only do all the players get on the My Personal Football Coach Dynamic Ball Mastery app, all the coaches get the app and the coaches pass as well. But also now what I'm going to do is, as part of the Pro Club package, I'm going to fly out to LA, film some of their players doing their challenges to populate the app with their own players. So that really helps with engagement. So the Pro Club package really does now completely individualise the app. It's almost completely white labelled. So really excited about that. Lots of other clubs coming on board as well. Looking forward to doing a lot more travelling in the months to come. Thanks also everyone for the feedback about the My Personal Football Coach Level 1 Ball Mastery and 1v1 e-learning course. Been really positive. Now added a 5th unit to that course, so I've got full sessions that I've done myself. A couple of sessions that I've done up at Wolverhampton Wanderers Academy, 1v1 session and a defending session, to really help see some of the key principles of ball mastery and 1v1, these two major themes used at the top academies in world soccer. So if you're interested in ball mastery and 1v1, make sure you check out the My Personal Football Coach Level 1 Ball Mastery and 1v1. Here's one of our partner clubs here in London, TFA. Really proud that he's now actually got the course for all of his coaches. So here's a little bit of Charlie telling us a little bit about how he found the My Personal Football Coach Level 1.
Hi, I'm Charlie from the TFA. I found the My Personal Football Coach Level 1 course really beneficial to really understand how to coach young players. It's really easy to engage with and very insightful. I'm now getting it for all of the coaches at our club to help upskill them and improve the quality of delivery for the kids throughout TFA. I would definitely recommend it.
So there you go, guys. If you're interested in just to find out if you're a coach or you work within a club, you want to find out how the My Personal Football Coach Level 1 can really help take your coaching game to the next level, just drop me a line. The Dynamic Ball Mastery Program is going from strength to strength. We're just in the midst of doing another rebuild to the app. Some fantastic new additions coming to it, which I'm really excited about, which is going to make it even better. So really excited about to bring you all that news in the next few weeks. But now back to the show, and got a great guest on, Tom Hounsell. Tom's a coach at Fulham FC's academy, one of the best academies in England, a prolific producer of talent for Fulham's first team and professional teams all over the country, and also the England national team. So really excited to get Tom on. Tom's also an academic, works at St Mary's University, so good to get someone who bridges that gap between research and practice. I mean, look, I don't call myself academic. I was fortunate enough to do a master's in education, so I really am interested in research. But obviously, as we all know, there's a lot of research coming out, a lot of noise, and sometimes that doesn't marry up to the practice. So great to get Tom on board, who's a great coach, to bring his experience and his journey on it. So bring some real interesting elements to the debate. So I know you're going to enjoy this one. So without further ado, let's get into the show. So Tom Hounsell, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
Can you give us a brief description of your playing and coaching background, please?
Originally grew up in Dorset in the West Country, really. Played for a couple of different clubs, but was at Bristol Rovers for a little bit and sort of jumped around to other clubs down there from sort of a playing perspective, and then decided to come up to London, go to university, and then worked for Fulham's foundation really for a number of years, and then at the same time got a job with AFC Wimbledon in their academy, and then I moved from AFC to Fulham's academy whilst sort of still doing some of the foundation work before then keeping my job with Fulham in the academy, and then taking a job at St Mary's University as a lecturer.
And then so you progressed from Wimbledon to Fulham, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, and so how long have you been at Fulham now?
My third season at Fulham.
Third season.
In the YDP, yeah.
Wicked. Okay, cool. So just how did that first academy job come about then at AFC Wimbledon? Just a little bit about that.
Yeah, I suppose a little bit of who you know, really. I suppose I had a friend who I was working with on the sort of college program at the foundation who was working at Millwall. Then there wasn't really a job opportunity at Millwall, but I was really keen to get into academy football, and he was working there at the time, so sort of went down there and did a couple of sessions, but was told, look, we haven't really got an opening, but we think there might be something here for the future, and then Millwall actually put me in touch with AFC Wimbledon and said, look, there's a role going at AFC Wimbledon, maybe you should apply for that, and so I did, and that was sort of me for 2 years really. So I was pretty thankful really that there was some good people out there willing to sort of help me on my journey, so to speak.
And what was that like then? Tell us a little bit about that your first academy role. I mean, what was that like in terms of, was it quite daunting? I mean, what was the difference between coaching at that level and the stuff you've done in the community programme?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose with the community stuff, originally that was that quite traditional, like after school clubs, Saturday morning clubs. That sort of evolved into a college program, and I'm really thankful for that opportunity, really, because we were lucky that we were coaching 11v11 every day. We could sort of create our own sort of syllabus, so to speak. We could periodise in the way that we wanted to. We had a really great group of lads who really wanted to work hard and almost try and that sort of second chance thing and get back into the pro game. So we coupled with a non-league team. We entered the FA Youth Cup, and it's probably those experiences I think that helped me develop my understanding and working with players. So I had that exposure probably alongside working within an academy. And I suppose the best thing about working at AFC Wimbledon is they're very happy for you to make mistakes. It's just very much a great club to go and get some experience, really. I think there's some great people there who are really happy to support people, you in your coaching journey, so to speak, and just question you in a way that doesn't seem particularly daunting or critical, but try to get you to think about why you're doing what you're doing, which is really good. The one thing that struck me the most at AFC Wimbledon was the people, not just the coaches, but the parents, the players, just all really great people. And no one really who ever seemed to cause any sort of tension, I suppose, but we're just very much happy to support in that sort of longer micro goal of trying to achieve, allow their players, their sons or themselves to move on to the next part of transitional phase within the academy. So yeah, I suppose any sort of fears or that I did have very much were put to rest pretty quickly just because of the environment that was created.
So tell us a little bit about then your role then as the 15s coach there. It was 15s, right, you did there? Is that right?
So I did 13s and 14s at AFC.
Sorry, 13s and 14s. So then give us a typical working week for yourself at AFC Wimbledon doing the 13s and 14s.
Originally, very fortunate that I got to work with the same group over sort of 2 years. I really enjoyed the fact that I was given that opportunity. But it would basically be sort of 3 training sessions a week, and then sort of match day at the weekend. And obviously, resources is very different to, I suppose, what I'm accustomed to do now. So one of those sessions would be, sort of under a floodlight on a grass pitch on a Thursday, which is always testing because kick the ball away from the practice. You're in complete darkness. So all the best, never too sure when the lads went out there to collect the football whether they're going to come back or not, I suppose. But I think those experiences really help develop players. I suppose really grounds the players, makes them really hungry, and the players almost absorb that and go, well, do you know what? We can cope with anything. So I suppose we had sort of Tuesday had more of a technical focus. Thursday was then you pick your time on the grass, and then Friday sort of out of Tooting and Mitcham on the Astro, and that's probably where did the most amount of sort of tactical stuff in the week. So I suppose if you think about it, it was like quite tight and technical on a Tuesday, sort of more sort of a medium-sized area, and more stuff like sort of possession type stuff on a Thursday, and then Friday really like some tactical stuff, but ready for the Sunday.
And so, did the boys have day release there on the 13s and 14s?
Not at that time, no. So they just came in for their evening session. So. And
tell us a little bit about what was at the time the philosophy of the club, the playing philosophy.
Yeah, so very much. I still think it was like it's very. I suppose what's quite popular everywhere really. It was like we want to play through the thirds. We want to play out from the back. We want to have a high press. We want to play 4-3-3. And that didn't really. So that didn't really ever waver either. Again, the games program for a Cat 3 team is very varied, because I think you have, you play your other Cat 3 teams quite regularly, and then mixed into that will be exposure to sort of Cat 2s and Cat 1s, and
that was going to be my next question. So, for instance, you're playing at Chelsea. Would you change the way the boys playing, considering you're playing against a big Cat 1 club?
No, I don't think so. And I think it's about I don't ever think that, particularly at the club, that it's it's deemed like, we're playing at Chelsea. I think yes, they really relish the test, but I think if anybody's ever particularly now when we play FC Wimbledon, it's always a really difficult challenge, because I think they're highly motivated to sort of prove that they're we might only be little FC Wimbledon, but we're here to really come and test you. And I think that was always the case, and I think particularly with sort of header coaching and under 18s coach, it was this is what we want to, this is what we're trying to do, this is what we're developing the boys for. We want to try and test ourselves against the perceived better academy. So yeah, it didn't really ever waver really, and I think that's why at times they get from a success perspective on that one day, you'll often see them picking up results against Cat 1s or Cat 2s.
Interesting. And tell us a little bit about then, practically, I mean, as a coach, were you working from a curriculum? How much freedom did you have in terms of session design? I mean, what did that look like at AFC Wimbledon? Yeah,
so there was a curriculum, and what was really nice is that from a youth phase, we were able to sit down and sort of review that and understand what was important to us at what times. So yeah, like a loose skeleton framework really, and then certainly had a lot of freedom to design practices in the way in which you wanted to. I think it was also good there was almost that element of constructive criticism where if you're putting on practices in certain ways, then you have to be willing, I think, as a coach, to be able to rationalise those and justify those. And I think as long as you can, as long as you're in a position where you know why you're doing what you're doing, I don't think anyone will ever necessarily question what that is. I suppose the sticking point comes when you're doing something but you can't really rationalise or justify why you're doing it, or you're doing it for different reasons than, you know, trying to develop the players or whatever. So yeah, definitely had like free reign. And I suppose coming from you know, coming out of St Mary's as, you know, one of the hubs for teaching games for understanding, I had a very much like a games focus, particularly when I was fresh out of university. It was like, you know, I want to really develop my understanding of this stuff I've just been taught at university. So tried to do as much as that sort of as I could through games. And I suppose, you know, I had probably a bit of an internal battle, particularly on the Tuesday when we had more like isolated technical practices. You know, I would sort of question, you know, why are we doing these? And I think the sort of head of coaching, under 18s coach who was there, you know, Jeremy, who's academy manager and stuff, they'd be able to rationalise why they think it's important. And I think if you're going to go and work for a club and people can tell you why they think it's important for their players at that time, then you have to respect that. And so probably I also began to sort of open up a little bit and begin to go, well, do you know what, this might not work for everyone all of the time, so I might do some of this stuff to really develop the players in different ways for different reasons. You know, and you know, for those guys, they've had a lot of success recently of players transferring into the first team who, you know, were at that, you know, who are either in the 14s, 15s, 16s, 17s at that time. So yeah, really pleased to have been able to sort of understand what it is that they do, and then now be able to see, you know, players who, you know, like Toby Civic comes off the bench and scores against West Ham in the FA Cup. You know, they're cool moments, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to come back to that academic debate a bit later. I just want to concentrate on Wimbledon at the moment, but just tell me a little bit about then, just as a club being at AFC Wimbledon. I mean, sandwiched between Fulham and Chelsea, you know, and these big clubs. What was that like in terms of like recruitment? Was it quite a lot of pressure keeping the better the players? I mean, and you know, and facilities in terms of that. Looking back, obviously you're now working at Fulham. What was that?
Yeah.
What was that whole experience like?
Yeah, I definitely think from, you know, whatever your goals are going to be affected by the resources that you have available. And I think the one thing I think they do really well is they develop a culture which people really buy into. So whether you're working at the club or you're a player at the club, you really love the environment that you're in. I think people work really hard for their badge, if that makes sense. And I think because of that, they almost differentiate themselves slightly from, between the other Cat 1s that they're sort of sandwiched by from a location perspective. And I don't think they're ever that cautious, I think, either. So, you know, they'd be happy to go and play their best players against you know, the Cat 1s without really any fear that you know, their players might be, you know, turned to maybe go and join those other clubs. I think naturally it's going to happen on occasion. Probably been some like, you know, Pat Roberts, for example, who moved from one to the other. Those things are always going to happen, I think. But they're willing to go, do you know what, we're proud of our programme, and hopefully the players see that it's worthwhile buying into. And I think the clubs do work quite well together, you know, from a pre-academy perspective, or if we're, you know, now at Fulham, if we know we're potentially releasing players, or we've got players who we think might be suitable for them, then, you know, we'll call them up and say, look, this player, we think they might be suitable for you guys. Like, you know, we're happy to send them your way. So I think, you know, as much as possible, I do think there is a bit of a collaborative nature potentially between the clubs.
Interesting. And so then tell us about your when you got a job at Fulham. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I was already working in the foundation, I suppose, and I was already probably quite known to certain people. The club's quite small, so, you know, walking around and doing whatever, you sort of meet people and have conversations and stuff. And then I remember playing Fulham with AFC Wimbledon, and from looking back at looking at the game, is actually, I think they had some really great individuals, Fulham, but we ended up winning the game. I think we played quite well. We played quite well, and I think it was probably a little bit unexpected. We played out from the back. We still did those things that we really wanted to do. So I suppose it just that meant the conversation got put forward, I suppose. Just got asked. I think I had a couple of friends some of my closer friends who worked in the academy already, and it was like, when you're coming over, like, we think you're a good coach, so when there's an opportunity, we'll let you know. And for me at the time, I think the only reason the reason I left really was just a different challenge. I certainly wanted to be able to challenge myself and work with players who potentially, were representing their country, or just wanted to challenge myself with, those really elite players, I suppose, that maybe only, I'm not saying that none of them exist in Cat 3 clubs, I don't think that's true, but there's certainly more in Cat 1s, and then also just probably tied everything a bit closer together. From I was already working the foundation there. It meant I didn't have to do the Superman kit change in the car between sessions, on the way back from one to the other. So yeah, just sort of tied everything up. So I actually went in, had an interview, and originally got asked to take the under-9s. So I was shifting from 13s and 14s to come across to be an under-9s coach. And I've never really looked at age groups in sort of a hierarchical fashion. So for me, that was fine. It was just a different challenge. It was just a new challenge. And then I think I did like 1 or 2 sessions with the 9s, and then got asked to do the 14s. So I was either a hopeless foundation phase coach, or they thought that I was appropriate maybe to work with some older players. So
interesting.
Yeah.
And sorry to butt in there, mate. Just, it's interesting. I get this question a lot from people listening to podcasts saying, how can I get into academy football? So just thinking about your journey there. I mean, you've worked at 2 great clubs. Now you work at Fulham, one of the best academies in the country. It's like, did you? I mean, you talk about the networking. That's really important, and obviously working the foundation of a club was also. I mean, that's how I made my entrance into academy football as well. Do you think that's a real, a powerful tool? Do you recommend people do that if they're thinking about trying to get involved in academy football?
Yeah, 100%. I think I get it all the time with my students at university. I think academy football was like put on this pillar. One, without really an appreciation of the reality of working in the academy, i.e. you're going to be working in evenings and weekends, and you're going to be, you're probably going to be working 7 days a week. And there's also this thing where I think they think that it's just, that's the natural progression. Like, right, I've done my B licence, so where's my academy job? And I think they miss out this, I don't know, an academy coach who hasn't had years and years of exposure to different experiences. When I was a student at university, I used to carry a bag of footballs into lecture with me, and then when it got to like 3 o'clock, I used to leave and go and do an after school club somewhere in London. I'd be on the train going somewhere to do a session. So I think massively you've got to go out there, and you've got to gain some experiences and appreciate that each of those will have different value for different reasons for you. So I think people go, I've done I've worked in the foundation for a year, I've done after school clubs, that's me done. It's like, well, that old sort of cliche, have you had the same experience sort of over and over again, really? Or, is it actually, have you actually been learning? Have you been reflecting? Have you been trying new things? I think that's really important.
I suppose it's that combination, isn't it? I mean, it's like the rites of passage, sort of, isn't it? For a coach, you've got to do those, like I did, those after school clubs, those mixed ability sessions. But then obviously, the key is then, making those connections, getting known that then, as you know, academy football is still nepotistic in terms, it's about relationships, because it's a very stressful environment. So, you've got to, often people are encourage you to apply for jobs, and they're often filled before they actually go out.
Yeah, and I think that's natural, right? But I also think people are only going to, from a networking perspective, people are only going to put you forward for things if they think you're good enough to do them. I think that's the other important thing. I think people, say, I think I was even guilty of it originally, going, oh yeah, it's just who you know. There's probably an element of that, but there's also an element of you've got to be good enough as well.
Yeah, I think you made a good point there when you talked about your team played Fulham and they played really well. They won, but not necessarily the win, but the manner of the win. And that's why I think that's why I say you sort of make your own luck, right? I mean, your work speaks for itself. So people see your session, see how your team plays, see what the players are like. Your coach, and then that's like they're like your walking CVs, right?
Yeah. Of course, yeah. No, I completely agree.
Interesting. So then tell us a little bit. Then you're moving into Fulham, Cat 1 club, one of the best academies in the country, massive club. What were the main obvious contrasts you saw to begin with?
Yeah, I think probably just we have some really clear goals, and we have really clear processes and structures in place to help achieve those goals. And I think that process is definitely something that I'm always really impressed by. So people talk about sort of plan, do, review, but each element of those is really of that process is really well thought through and really purposeful. And then I suppose having a clear idea about what it is that we want to achieve, how we might go about doing that, and then ultimately the ability to continue to reflect and strategize and understand that that's constantly evolving, with some really good people in place to help achieve that.
So then to give us an example then of your planning, what goes into planning your sessions, for instance. You work as a phase or individually, or what's the process?
I think from that sort of micro level, in terms of planning, I think we involve like a multidisciplinary team, and I think there's always there's definitely room to improve that, but it's a continued emphasis to go. We're gonna include all departments, and we're gonna really try and individualise and tailor our planning for the individual players that we work with. And as a consequence, I think that means you have multiple people's sort of input and opinions for that constantly evolving plan. I think we try to do that. Certainly don't do it session to session. We have an awareness of what that might look like over time, and then ultimately it's our ability to go and do that. But then, like I say, be able to review that and appreciate what's worked, what might not have worked, what are the reasons for that, what are some of those causal factors for the fact that this seemed to have really worked for this person at this time, but it didn't for these players. So why was that? And maybe just asking some of those more sort of deeper lying questions rather than just surface level. How was your session today? It's more around, okay, are we making impact with these players? Yes or no, and how do we know those things as well?
And mention, so for instance, with your planning, you talked about obviously not going from session to session, but how much was it in terms of you working on a long-term or middle-term plan, and how much was, say for instance, you play a game on the weekend, and you say, wow, we really got to address that. Do you then shift that? Is it more reactionary like that, or is it a bit of both? How does that work?
Yes, I think there's flexibility in our sort of syllabus or framework for you to be able to address those issues. I think good advice has sort of always been given is if there's an elephant in the room, then you need to address it. So if there's something that's really blatantly obvious, then you might you might go, right, I'm going to have to do that. But don't necessarily think you have to throw your syllabus out the window. I think it's just where you're a little bit clever and how you use your coaching team. So if you're then moving, I don't know, we had a real problem with our press at the weekend, and actually we're moving into a create and convert block. Well, it definitely means that one of the coaching team can work with the out of possession team on some of the things, those reactionary things, whilst still within, the other coach can still work within the framework. So I think it's just a balance. But it's also, I suppose, around what do you think is important for you at the time. There's always going to be intended outcomes, but there'll also be unintended outcomes from what you do. So if you're you plan to do one thing and you want your outcomes to be this and this, but actually that might mean as a consequence you haven't dealt with those things. So I think there's constantly trade-offs. I think it's just the way in which you reflect on those, and whether you intended it to be as a larger trade-off as you first thought, perhaps.
And so tell us in a bit, what's the average week like for an under 15 then at Fulham?
Yeah, so if you're a full-time player, that will mean some sort of training every day apart from Fridays. Tuesday and Thursday being sort of the main day release sessions, and then evening sessions as well. But you also come in for sort of an hour and a half or so on a Monday and a Wednesday.
And so they have 2 days off school. They do 2 days day release, and then they come in for the other session. So sort of after school for an hour and a half or so on a Monday and Wednesday, and then in the afternoons they'll come out sort of full day release in the afternoons on a Tuesday and Thursday, and then evening sessions as well. And then 15s is always that sort of odd age group where lots of players will play up for the 16s. So we normally now combine together 15s and 16s to train together on a Thursday evening, and then some of those will be involved on a Saturday. We typically have tried to sort of make a conscious decision this year, particularly after Christmas, to have less Sunday games for the 15s, so that are available for selection for the 16s, and have more sort of midweek games, like internal games, which is supported by the competitions that they play anyway. They play in a midweek Floodlit Cup as well. So we've been tried to be quite conscious of the fact that we want to try and expose particularly this group to 16s football as much as we can, as early as we can. Interesting. And then so tell us a little bit about how then you structure your week. What's the technical, tactical average cycle for a week?
Yeah, I suppose tech breakdown really depends. We have scheduled sort of individual practice opportunities for the players. I suppose that's where maybe that more traditional, arguably people would call it like decontextualised. They'll be doing practice on their own around some of their targets, and that's pretty that's far more sort of technical repetition than anything else in the week. So we'll have that 45 minutes plus. We'll do like a position specific on a Saturday morning as well, sort of half an hour. So they're probably their 2 slots where they'll get the most technical repetition, and then within the framework of the rest of the week, that will just vary. So you have full scope to be able to design practices the way you want to. So in your hour and a half session, what that looks like is entirely up to the coaching team. But it will also be dependent on physical load as well. So we'll have quite purposefully planned tight and technical nights, like medium nights, and then large and tactical nights based on their physical loading throughout the week and depending on where their sort of games sit. And that sort of prescribes you in the syllabus. So you'll have your main theme from the philosophy, and then you'll have the area basically that you want to try and work in. And then we're really conscious that we use technology to be able to track GPS. So we try to, as much as possible, have an awareness of the physical load that our sessions have, and then what that looks like through the week. And that, I suppose that will also impact the type of practices that you put on.
Interesting. And tell us about the under 15 coaching team. Do you work? Is there another coach involved? You obviously work with a sports scientist. Yeah. So I'm as the head coach. I don't necessarily have a fixed assistant. The under 16s coach will work with me quite heavily, because ultimately most of the time now, particularly now, we do a lot of stuff 15s, 16s together. A lot of the 15s will play up. YDP phase manager will also come and support, and then obviously the multidisciplinary team in terms of strength and conditioning coach, psychologist, nutritionist, sports scientist, physios, whatever else. So we'll all work together, and it's quite nice, I suppose. Probably from, again, that's the big difference between clubs is, like I say, resource, but also personnel. So
being able to, went to 6v6 tournament a couple of weeks ago, had a psychologist for the phase came with us, and I think that was really really important, really, because we talk about these opportunities for the players to learn in these like competitive situations, and I don't necessarily know if we actually help them develop the skills that they need to within those settings. So to have somebody whose like main focus is that, I think is really, really positive.
I was going to ask one of my questions about competitive football. Do you think the boys at 15 play enough competitive football?
Yeah, I think it completely depends on how successful you are, right? I mean, if you do well, then you've got sort of one major competition that goes throughout the year, which is Floodlit Cup, which is a really great concept. I think Premier League have done really well to develop this idea to be able to go and play, midweek under the lights. Often, the requirement is for you to play in, stadiums, or we play ours on our arena pitch or 23s pitch. So, that exposure, that sort of additional pressure is really, really positive, and we always see it every year. The sort of first Floodlit Cup game with those boys, they're sort of in awe. They don't really know how to manage their emotions. They're quite anxious because the stands filled with their parents. The parents have brought 4 or 5 people with them because it's this like really great moment for them. But if you do well in that competition, obviously you have far greater exposure to it. So
that was going to be my next follow up. Is that obviously as we know, those environments are so different for players and for coaches. Do you think that maybe there could be opportunity to play a little bit more? I mean, obviously, for instance, on the continent, there's a lot more competitive football. Do you think maybe that, because like you say, the psychologist will tell you that it's such a different environment, those coping mechanisms, do you think maybe we leave it a little bit too late to get the boys into competitive football?
Yeah, I just think
regularly.
It's about,
I mean that regular.
I think it's a balance. I think when we go on tour in summer, we always say we go on tour to win, and we have that, I suppose, that added focus, which means we have a little bit more. We do a little bit more in the syllabus around game management and sort of management strategies. So I think for a Cat 1 team, you probably do manage to have that exposure a fair amount, because you're involved in these Premier League competitions. You go on several tours throughout the year. I suppose the if you're a Cat 2 or Cat 3 team, to be able to have that must be far more challenging. And I believe your standard sort of Sunday morning academy games at times can be really sanitised. It can be quite a sterile environment. Parents aren't allowed to they're not really, they're very sort of pinned back, aren't they? Although they're allowed to encourage the team, you don't necessarily shout. And if you go to a tournament, all of a sudden you go, to Germany or somewhere else in Europe, and you've got parents banging on drums and singing the club songs. It's like a really different environment. Yeah,
the Polish parents letting off flares. The Poznan parents going crazy with flares and stuff. It's quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And our boys would never ever have anything exposure to that. And I think we are beginning to try to develop develop some of this stuff. But we went to 6v6 tournament with the 15s in January, and it was piloted for the first time. The tournament was great. Everything about the tournament was fantastic, but there was there was hardly any parents there. There wasn't much of an atmosphere, and I think I don't know how you. I don't have the answers. I don't know how you create those environments or ask people to, but I think there's definitely scope to, try and develop more stuff where the environment's a little bit harsher, it's a little bit tougher, it maybe matches the reality a bit closer.
Yeah, I've definitely found that when I was towards my last years at Chelsea, that with the increased amount, for instance, futsal tournaments, lots of different tournaments, there's definitely an improvement in terms of getting the boys in those competitive environments a lot. But I always just felt when we went abroad and played, the likes of Ajax and Anderlecht, their game management and game savviness was just so much better, because obviously they play so many tournaments a year. They can play like 20 or 30 tournaments a year. So I just thought that's one advantage those foreign boys had over ours. Maybe. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, and also I think they're not, they're not afraid to say they want to win. Either, do you know what I mean? They go to those competitions, they want to win them, and they act in a way. I think the way that they behave, whether it's right or wrong from a coach's perspective, but it's quite clear that they're passionate about results and winning. They want to win, and I don't know. I think sometimes we get caught up, particularly in various contexts. I think it's we get to this point where it's like, I'm not worried about whether we win or lose. It's just about the performance. But the purpose of the game is to beat the opposition. That's why we do it. So I think sometimes that can be a little bit devalued at times. I think we should feel more comfortable with going, do you know what? We want to win, and that's because that's the purpose. The purpose is to outwit your opponent.
Interesting. And also then tell us a bit about that 15s year. I mean, it's quite a challenging year for the players, isn't it? I mean, it's a big decision time for the players and the clubs. How do you cope, support those players through that? I mean, and because obviously when you obviously must start making your decisions, I suppose all the way year round, but I mean, players are getting released. How do you support those guys, and if they've been in the system from 9 years old, for instance?
Yeah, I think the first thing is my role first and foremost is to coach those players. So I certainly don't at the beginning of the season try to. I'll start with a clean slate, so to speak. Although you get the report from the coaches from the previous years, you've just seen them in previous years. I think you have to fully appreciate that things aren't linear. So just because they didn't perform particularly well at 14s doesn't mean they will at 15. So first thing is just try to give every player an opportunity to be able to develop themselves, but also be given the opportunity, be afforded opportunities where that they can really show off what they're about. And I think that's my first thing, is just that level of care, I suppose, has to be. I try to make it as apparent as possible. I really care about sort of every player that I have, that I'm giving them. And for me, my sort of perfect goal would be to have every single one transition into the next age group or next phase. So I think that's like the first thing, and then just have to be really honest. And I think that really apparent about what have really clear messages about what players need to get better at, and that has to be that has to come from everybody who will be ultimately making decisions, right? So if people think that a player needs to get better at this for these reasons, then I think that has to be really honest about that. And then I think it's also, from a coach's perspective, it's also important to like I say, effectively plan, but also effectively review. So I think it's really important to continually just challenge some of your assumptions. So if you think players need to get better at a certain thing, well, how much exposure to that have they had? And is that backed up by minutes in positions on the pitch? Is that backed up by what you've done in training? Is the link between what you think you've done and what you've actually done, tight enough? Are you self-aware enough to, really go, I've provided this player with these opportunities. They played this many minutes in this position. We've had this, many training sessions on this target, and then far more in a more robust position to be able to, and a more informed position to make decisions than potentially not. And I think it's also about effective tracking of stuff. So, I think it's important to have, analysts who clip their targets. I think it's important to understand, the statistics from an individual perspective, and try and just challenge maybe some of the assumptions that take place. If he doesn't get around the pitch particularly well, okay, so what's his GPS statistics then? How do they relate to the rest of the group? And actually have some objective stuff to back up maybe some of the more subjective assumptions that you have for players.
It's quite interesting. I mean, that's a good example of that, isn't it? I often had that in the past when they say, for instance, he doesn't get around the pitch very well. What do we? You talked about it's accountability, isn't it? What we actually do to try and help him improve in that area. Do you know what I mean? Like you said, I was sort of an academy. Did we really, do everything possible to, that's a good example, isn't it? Can we really help someone in that area? And what exactly are they doing in terms of like movement, development, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you have to, if you're willing to make such big decisions, you have to be able to back those up with your practice.
Interesting. And so look, I mean, so obviously you work at St Mary's, you're a lecturer at St Mary's, you're an academic in football. There's not that many academics in the game, is there really? I mean, in terms of, why do you think that is, when maybe there's not that many people from academia within football?
You still hear me, mate?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Sorry, mate, we just broke up. Fine, yeah, no problem.
Did you hear the question? Yeah.
I think, no, I think, I certainly think that there's probably more people who start off as coaches who then find themselves in academia rather than maybe the other way around, which, I know a couple of people who, start off as coaches, want to become better coaches, and therefore, sort of the route people go down is just to try and become as informed as possible, and therefore, fall into becoming slightly maybe more academic. I definitely do think that there's sort of them and us culture, where I think certain people will, talk about researchers, talk about academics, talk about authors of papers, and almost think that they're sort of ivory tower academics. And I think they're massively constrained, particularly with potentially the way in which they have to write. That makes it not particularly accessible for coaches, right, or particularly people who haven't been through an education system. So I think there is a greater responsibility for maybe academics to be able to synthesize some complex concepts and theories so that they're able to be interpreted by people in a slightly easier fashion. And I do think that's beginning to happen more regularly. If you go on Twitter, there's so much sources of information. You can follow key academics. You can podcasts such as this, and people do webinars. There's all this information. I think just the ability to be able to actually present it in a format that actually people can really engage with is the real skill. I think there are a few people who do that really well. But then I think flip that, and I think there's a responsibility from coaches as well. I think, as a coach, you have to want to engage with information. I don't think it's necessary. Don't know a job out there where you ever just get to the top of the mountain and go, that's me done. I'm in this senior position. I'm CEO of this organisation, or I'm a manager at this organisation. You just cross your arms, think continually looking to get better. So there has to be a two-way street. I think that is beginning to happen maybe slightly more, but I suppose the challenge is that time, right? It's really difficult to do all of those things, your job, your coaching role, invest time in your own sort of understanding and learning, and trying to combine those things can be quite challenging. And
I know we've had this conversation in the past. Why do you think there's such an imbalance between some of the research and practice, what goes on the ground? You mentioned obviously that at AFC Wimbledon they used to have isolated practice there. Why do you think there's that sort of conflict almost between some of the research coming out and actually what goes on and the actual in the field?
Yes, I think there's certain. I certainly think that there's certain narratives that are potentially pushed. I definitely think that I think it takes a long time for either practice to catch up with research or vice versa. I don't ever think they're particularly harmonious, and I think that's a challenge. I think what we need to begin to establish is maybe more nuanced pictures of what's going on in specific contexts, and begin to understand actually what's going on in these specific coaching contexts, rather than making generalisable statements across lots of different clubs. Actually spending time at a club, understanding what's going on, how that relates to what they're trying to achieve. Is it evidence informed? Is it working and actually isn't contrary to the evidence? I think those things are really important.
Well, what's your thoughts? I mean, obviously, then coming from working in both academia and football. I mean, you mentioned that you came from university and a very much game-based approach. I mean, what's your thoughts on that now?
Yeah, I think there's no like silver bullet, right? There's no one way to do anything, and I think you can read lots of different things, particularly from a practice perspective. Every context is going to be different. There's a completely different sort of ecology in each context. There's different people, different resources. The goals are different. And that's always, so that means everything's always going to be context. It's always going to be context specific. So it completely depends. I think that's probably what I've just said then has become quite a fashionable statement. So it depends on context and stuff. And I think because of that, we probably don't then go, okay, so what's actually going on there then? So okay, it depends. What does it depend on? Who, why? And begin to actually establish what works for which players, at what time and why. I think if we can begin to start to have an appreciation of that, maybe we can begin to be more aware of what potentially might be effective coaching practice moving forward.
So I was on the Advanced Youth Award at St George's Park, and a really amazing course, great course. We had Mark Williams in, who's obviously one of the sports scientists who's very much pushes this narrative. He was arguing that under-9 should be playing 11-a-side football because it's the closest thing to the actual game. But that was like my thinking process there, is that actually maybe that's the disconnect between someone who maybe has not been on the field and understands the different needs, particularly for young players, and maybe understanding you getting different sorts of outcomes from different sorts of things. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think it's a real challenge. I think we to be able to have that contextual understanding whilst being able to have the appreciation of all of this complex theories and stuff, to be able to then construct these ideas. I think that, like you say, that connection needs to happen more. So whether that means that they spend more time in the field and have a greater appreciation of why people are doing certain things for those players, for those under-9 players, but also be able to maybe take the idea that why is it he thinks that playing 11-a-side is the most is the thing that's that they should be doing, or what is it about those things, and how can we then take some of those ideas and then maybe input them into what we do? I suppose it's that two-way sort of street that I maybe was talking about earlier. I think it'd be great to understand why he thought that was the sort of answer for those players.
I suppose it's it's almost the extremist sort of everything that has to be in that contextualized setting. Everything has to be within the game. Everything completely. Otherwise, anything else is completely untransferable. Non-transferable, or a waste of time almost. I mean, that was the sort of message. But that's what I mean. You said earlier, it depends. And Dave Collins obviously talks about that a lot as well. There's no one way. But I suppose it's just, for me, it's just about having a balance, right? And understanding what players' needs are. For me, especially with the stuff hear a lot about the perception action coupling, also talking about contextualization. For me, it's the importance of an individual player, an individual boy, an 8-year-old boy, spending time with the ball, understanding how that reacts, and those decision-making things that are going on there are infinite. They're always going on, and might be less than maybe if I'm playing in a game. But for me, those decision-making on the ball is much more important at that young age. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's about having an appreciation of what you think is important, and then being able to transfer that into your practice for those individuals, right? So there might be people out there who have a different opinion to the one you've just presented, and they might say, I think at that time, for that foundation phase player, awareness is the most important thing, and that's okay. But then, how does your practice actually help develop awareness, and how much of what you do is connected to that idea? I don't think we can ever neglect either or. I don't think you can go, right, we're only ever going to do games. I think I came from an undergraduate where the sort of rhetoric around games was pushed quite highly, and I think that served me to say, I think I have the ability to be able to create a game that has the same outcomes as would be able to give players the same outcomes that maybe I couldn't achieve in a technical practice, and that might just be my own experiences and my own my own preferences and my own abilities as a coach. If I was really effective at designing really good technical practices, I don't think that's then something to like sneer your nose up at, and I don't think we can go, oh no, you must be doing this. I just think it's about having an appreciation of where you're comfortable and where you think you can make impact. And I think if you can design really good technical practices and you've got really good technical knowledge and you think and you can make real impact with those players, and definitely don't then go, oh well, I'm being told I've got to do, I've got told I've got to be coaching through games. It's like, well, not necessarily, and I don't necessarily buy into this idea that it'll be, at least this person giving games ago will be better than what they were doing before. I think there's definitely a balance to be struck.
Well, I mean, I think that's, for me, it's all about balance, right? I mean, if I was looking at my academy sessions, I do 10 or 20 minutes ball work, and then everything would be in a game setting. So, for me, it's like as a practitioner, I definitely looked at the research and changed the way I coach in my 10 years in academy football. A lot more game-based stuff. I prefer small-sided games formats. I think you do get more skillful outcomes, but still, for me, that individual time with the ball is really key. And I suppose it's about trying to think about the most effective time to use it and when players can get on it, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's then, and then it's, I think the thing that you've just sort of almost given away there is that you have developed quite a reflective capacity. You've gone, right, well, this is what I do, and this is why I do it. And I think that's ultimately the responsibility for sort of coach education and coach developers moving forward, is just to develop more sort of reflective practitioners, rather than just being sort of passively engaged in maybe some of these more these other accounts or these other narratives that get pushed forwards, like, oh, you must coach through games, you must use constraints, this is what we want you to do. And actually just have more of a reflective capacity about what it is that you do, why you do it, and then what impact that's having on the players that you coach.
I think you made the great point earlier. You've got to have a plan. You're doing something for a reason. You'd be able to legitimise what you're doing, and in doing that with an end goal in mind.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think that rationalisation is where I think more work needs to take place. I think we just need to be more aware of why we're doing what we're doing ultimately, and then consequently what the impact is.
So how much technical work will you do with your players? I mean, in that, where you talked about them doing the 45-minute session, and will you do ever take someone out of a game setting if you think they want to work on something?
I think I always try to. I suppose I work with maybe slightly older players. I think I always would. I'm quite sympathetic to what the players need. So if the player turns to me and goes, you know what, I'd really want to try. I'm really struggling to do this. Can I get more practice doing it? Or I will just. I suppose it's just that ability to be able to construct practices that have lots of opportunity for them to practice. That's sort of probably, that concept of sort of repetition without repetition. But if I can design a practice where I know I can get they can have lots of opportunity to practice their specific target, I think it's the balance. So then I don't want to completely demoralise them. So if it's something they really can't do, how can I also scaffold that so that I can move sort of complexity up and down, so the success that they're achieving in the practice is also isn't always, it's not always out of reach. They are getting some success, and then if the player then goes, I really want to work on this, and this. Okay, right. Well, let's go and do it. I think.
So so within that session, then, are you relying on self-correction then on those? So, for instance, you have a player who's, a wide player who's having problems crossing, for instance. You set up a practice to have lots of crossing opportunities. Are you relying on him just to try and figure that out himself?
No, I think it's really important, right? We have a set of outcomes. We design our practice. We structure our practice in a certain way, and then the next thing that's really important is our coach behaviours. I think, again, maybe with this sort of naive interpretation of maybe the narrative that's being pushed, is that the coach sort of just steps back and it doesn't do anything. I think you're there to help and support the players. So it's your understanding of how you can behave in a way in which will help and support them. And that might mean for some players being, like you say, it might be that you don't, you give them less information because they don't particularly, they want to try and work it out for themselves. They're highly motivated to try and work it out for themselves, and you might just offer, a few cues and triggers and some bits of information, or you might, and you might at times be really direct with players. I think it's about, again, trying to work out what behaviours are best for your individual and at that time. And have an appreciation of how also that might be affected by some of the other stuff that's going on, right? So
yeah, I suppose let's go back to that. Depends on the individual, right?
Yeah, definitely. But I think you have to be willing to be able to try lots of different things, to talk to your players in lots of different ways, to try and engage your players in different ways. But I definitely don't think. I think people maybe then become a little bit scared, and I see it a lot with students, scared to go in and coach, and coach people and go and help people and go and support people and ultimately talk to people. It's like the last thing that probably we managed to develop, through our degree. Like they come up with some great practices. Honestly, the most creative thinkers when it comes to practice design, but they're so reluctant to go and actually talk to people, go and help people, go and support people, and that very much for me is like trial and error. It's like go and get to know people, go and see how they respond when you talk to them, and I think that's that takes time ultimately. It's about developing relationships, but you have to be willing to go and give different things a go as well.
Okay, and just finally, what would your advice be for a young aspiring coach who wants to try and get into academy football like yourself?
I think it's just a blend of as many different experiences that you can possibly do. Like, don't say no to things because you don't think they'll have value, because they might. Go and take on different sessions, go and take on different challenges, go and work with different people, different groups of different ages, completely different people, right? Like different genders, whatever. Go and work with loads of different people in loads of different contexts. But then try and, as much as possible, reflect on what you do. I always go back, always tell my students that, I planned for a year, I planned every after school club and reflected on every after school club I ever did. I was on the train, I wasn't doing anything, it was like dead time. So it's like, right, I'm going to, and then create some more ideas and then generate some more ideas. It's just so important that you go through that sort of plan, do review cycle, and spend quality time reflecting on why you've done what you've done, what was the impact, who did it work for. But yeah, go and get out there, and then also engaging as much sort of formal, and informal learning as you possibly can. I think there's never a time where that stops. You have to be willing to give up your time to go and appreciate some of these stuff. And you might go, you might go to certain things, and there's always something that you might pick up, even if it's you just developing your critical understanding of something. You're always gonna gain something. So I think it's really important that just pretty much just go and get on the grass, basically. Go and put the effort in.
Fantastic. Tom, thanks very much, mate. It's been fantastic. Appreciate your time.
No problem.
Thanks for tuning in to the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's Dynamic Ball Mastery Program is the world's leading online individual technical training program, proven and developed at the highest level in the English Premier League. Sign up now to train like the pros and take your game to the next level. Master the ball, master the game.